give this title to my presentation, I think you are bothered with this question: is Russia a great power or not? But I am studying the public opinion in Russia, and my mission here is to deliver what bothers Russians, and this is the question that bothers them. And the relation to the world community of this issue is that the anxiety of Russians about this matter of greatness of their power is determining somehow the behavior of Russia on the international scene. And this is what affects, if not the world, but the Europe to a great extent. Now, why are they so much concerned with that? Let's just go for a very short piece to the history of perestroika and the collapse of the Soviet Union, and you will see how different is the perception of these events between you here, the international community, and the community within Russia. Well, people think that it was the collapse, the end of the communist empire, and that the nations in Central and Eastern Europe have their freedom at last. Well, you just having excursions along the streets of Berlin, you have seen the famous wall that was broken through in the end of 80s, and that was a sign of freedom coming to Eastern Europe. And the collapse and actually the end of the communist utopia all over the world. In my country, the perception of the same events was very different. Initially, people like us and many others, almost, I would say, over the third of the population of the country, welcomed the new developments and had very strong hopes to become a so-called normal country. That is the country like other European nations that will join the European home. It is the Gorbachev's formula, and that we will then go together with other European nations towards the prosperity of market economy and democratic political system. Rather soon, the things started to look different, and the hopes of the kind I have reported just now were frustrated, and Russians turned to what is called in Russian Russia's own way. The idea of own way is a very tricky thing. If you fail to run on the parallel tracks with others and you see that you are left behind, then you can say, okay, I have my own way, where just there is only me here and nobody to compare me with. It's a kind of a comfortable self-soothing idea, and I'm really pitied that millions of Russians just have a kind of a mental asylum with the help of this idea. Now, the issue of great power is there. The idea is nowadays very popular that back there was the greatness of Russia. The Soviet Union was the great power, and Stalin's Soviet Union was the victorious part in the World War II, and Americans and other nations, they saw us as a dangerous but an equal partner in our interactions. And this is the source of the pride of Russians. They are really very proud of the victory in 1945, and actually this is the only thing Russians can be proud of at the moment. I'm sorry to say that. Okay, look, let's go even back and see how the structure of the Russian Empire and then of the USSR was organized in terms of the so-called West and East. Very obsolete terms, but still relevant to the situation I'm talking about. Russia and the Soviet Union had a kernel of these so-called Slavonic nations, Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians, and there was a western part of the country with slightly different regime and totally different culture. It was, let me remind you that Poland and Finland were the parts of Russian Empire, to say nothing about Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. And you can easily see the difference between these countries and their culture and Turkestan, what was called Turkestan, the Muslim southern part of the empire, with very different political culture and religious beliefs. But all this was covered with the blanket of Russian Empire, and then in a slightly reduced manner of the communist empire, which Soviet Union was. Then lots of things had happened, and let me say that the turning point after, say, this great victory of 1945, the second turning point in the development of my country, especially in the relationship with the external world, was the annexation of Crimea in 2014. The action that shocked the world, well, at least our neighbors in the Western world, and it was treated as the rude violation of the international law and order. And since then, Russia is treated, not Russians. I'm welcomed here, and I have a very welcoming attitude in many countries, and I'm very thankful for that. But I know that my country is perceived as a dangerous and unwanted partner. Well, in many respects, similar to Northern Korea or something like that. While in Russia, and I'm sure in saying what I'm going to say, because lots of our research confirm that Russia is a great, looking at itself as, herself as a great power. Why? The reason is that the reattachment, so-called reattachment of Crimea, was a great action because we dared not to obey United States, NATO, and European Union. And who can disobey the great power? Only the great power equally. This is the proof. This is the proof of the greatness of Russia. You gentlemen and ladies, you understand that I am depicting not my and my friends' opinions, but the one we, my friends and myself, we collect 143 million. So Russia behaved as a great power and is a great power again. And Russians are really happy with that. And maybe you know that President of Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, enjoys the approval of 83% in this September, and it was even 89 after these events I'm telling about, which is unprecedented in the Western world. The only precedents of that we know just in this southeast neighborship of our country. Now, back to that model of East and West. I will repeat that the terms and the ideas of East and West seem to be obsolete just when Fukuyama said that the history has ended, and he had in mind that this history of the East and West contradictions has ended, and everything was immersed into democratic and free market milieu. Unfortunately not. Still, Russia is somewhere in the middle between this so-called Western model and our former members of the Soviet Union, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, to say nothing about Finland. They demonstrate how productive this Western model could be. Estonia had made an enormous progress within this about 20 years, being very far ahead of Russia in terms of GDP per capita product and dimensions like that. And many features of the current Russian governance are resembling the ones from these East-Southern countries like Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan or Tajikistan, with rulers ruling for decades and decades, and with other features I think you are familiar with. One can think that Russia is oscillating between these two vectors, and this will be maybe correct. One can also say that Russia is steadily moving eastward in terms of this picture, and maybe this is also correct. But if we are to ask questions here, not giving answers, and I'm not presenting any answer, let me pose a question. Isn't Russia presenting just an example of being in this intermediary, neither east nor west position, but becoming a kind of either consistent or stagnating or newly emerging type of the development? Russians like to speak about the specific Russian civilization. I'm not the one who will apply this kind of a word, but isn't this a type of the development we are having now? And it means it is no good for many of those who live in Russia and who have the views like mine. But I know that lots of Russians are really happy with them being a great power. They are not happy with what's happening in their kitchens and in their pockets. No, not at all. But still, they are very proud of them being, and being great power is more important, at the moment at least, for them to be rich and wealthy. So maybe this is a type of the, if not of the society, but of the state of mind. But if this is question number one, I have also a question number two. I used Western type as a model which influences the development of my country. But it is not really Europe as such which is the model, but our perception, I mean us in Russia, our perception of Western civilization and Western culture. We have our own idea of that. But if it is about real Europe, which is represented here, my question is European civilization staying on the same place that it used to stay, say, 20 years ago, or it is moving? Is it moving in some maybe not very advantageous direction? I am not an expert in matters of governance, in matters of politics and even culture, but I have a very, uneasy impression of the news from Hungary, Poland, Austria, United Kingdom, United States, Australia, and maybe even Philippines, the places where we have the fundamentalist culture taking over the liberal one. And if it is a trend, maybe in this case, my country, with what is going on there, is in this trend. And we are not going out of, so to say, the common road, but we are together on that. But I don't like to go along this road. Thank you very much.